Yesterday afternoon, at exactly 1:15 p.m., a revelation by Ukraine made headlines worldwide and sent shockwaves through Moscow and Beijing. Ukrainian intelligence sources say Kyiv uncovered a covert oil route, allegedly financed by Beijing and valued at nearly $2.4 billion. This route was reportedly designed to funnel energy supplies directly into Russia's war economy. The significance of this revelation is not just the scale of the operation, but what it represents: a complex web of geopolitical maneuvering. It exposes how deeply China may have become entangled in sustaining Russia's war against Ukraine, challenging Beijing's public stance of neutrality. The announcement suggests that despite public calls for peace, China may have quietly enabled Moscow's ability to withstand Western economic pressure. It also underscores a significant evolution in Ukraine's intelligence capabilities, which now appear to extend far beyond defensive operations and deep into the strategic supply chains of its adversaries. To understand the magnitude of this exposure, we first need to grasp what this oil route actually was. This was not a single linear path, but a layered supply chain spanning multiple countries, corporations, and covert financial channels, all meticulously designed to mask its origins. For months, Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, known as the HUR, had been tracking suspicious energy shipments moving across Central Asia. The operation reportedly began under the guise of an energy development initiative. At its core was a consortium of Chinese energy firms, most notably the China Petroleum Engineering Corporation and Sino Energy Logistics, both with partial state ownership. Through subsidiaries registered in Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Kyrgyzstan, these companies created a series of logistical corridors labeled as dual-use infrastructure projects. Ostensibly, these shipments, disguised as industrial fuel transfers, were meant to supply industrial regions in Siberia and eastern Russia with civilian fuel. But in reality, Ukrainian analysts now claim they served as a shadow corridor. Documents allegedly obtained through Ukraine's cyber intelligence operations reveal that these two major Chinese conglomerates were instrumental in establishing the infrastructure. Through layers of shell companies and offshore subsidiaries, the operation managed to obscure its connection to China's central authorities. According to preliminary reports from Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, the leak came after a joint cyber and field intelligence operation. Ukrainian cyber units reportedly gained access to this network last month when a logistics contractor in Mongolia accidentally left an unsecured server online. This server allegedly contained encrypted trade documentation, including trade manifests, customs declarations, and financial correspondence, all pointing to the involvement of Chinese state-linked entities. This digital evidence was then cross-referenced with physical confirmation. Satellite imagery and customs records analyzed by Ukrainian and Western partners revealed that convoys of tanker trucks routinely crossed the Zabakalsk-Manzhouli border, one of the busiest checkpoints between China and Russia. On paper, the shipments were described as refined lubricants and synthetic fuel additives. In reality, analysts claim they were transporting crude and semi-refined oil. This oil was then reportedly tracked to Russian refineries in Omsk, Khabarovsk, and Novosibirsk, refineries that supply fuel to Russian military divisions operating along the eastern and southern Ukrainian fronts. To conceal the movements, the shipments were routed through third-party trading companies headquartered in Dubai, Astana, and Hong Kong. These intermediaries handled the financial transactions in yuan and dirhams, bypassing the SWIFT system entirely. The payments were then funneled through smaller banks in Central Asia, where transparency laws are weaker, effectively laundering the funds and masking their Chinese origins. The scale of the funding, $2.4 billion, is staggering. That amount translates into roughly 20 million barrels of crude equivalent energy, enough to sustain Russia's military logistics for several months. More importantly, it reveals how Moscow has managed to withstand the tightening Western embargoes and price caps on its oil exports. This covert route has functioned as an economic lifeline, which is critical given the current state of the conflict. The war has settled into a grinding war of attrition with shifting front lines. According to recent analysis from NPR.media, Ukrainian forces continue to hold many key sectors and inflict heavy pressure on Russian troops. In this phase, territorial gains are slow and costly. For example, a report from Russia Matters noted that while Russia gained approximately 48 square miles of Ukrainian territory within a single week, this represents a slower rate of advance than earlier in the year. The Institute for the Study of War notes that this attritional pressure is immense. This is reflected in casualty estimates published by The Economist as of October 13, 2025, which place total Russian casualties, including killed, wounded, and missing, between 984,000 and 1.438 million. This includes estimates of 190,000 to 480,000 killed. This immense strain on manpower and materiel, combined with a war economy facing logistical challenges, underscores Russia's desperate need for stable, covert supply chains to maintain its military-industrial complex. By securing a secret route through Central Asia, with Beijing's financial backing, Russia effectively built an energy lifeline beyond Western surveillance until now. This exposure, therefore, is a strategic blow to the Kremlin's confidence in its global partnerships. For years, Vladimir Putin has leaned on Beijing to offset the economic isolation imposed by the West. China has purchased discounted Russian oil, expanded trade, and even provided dual-use technology like drones, microchips, and machine tools that keep Russia's war machine functional. But with this revelation, the supposed no-limits partnership between Moscow and Beijing faces unprecedented scrutiny. Western intelligence agencies have long suspected China of providing Russia with non-lethal support. What Ukraine's latest revelation does is connect those dots to the energy sector. Energy is the invisible backbone of any modern military operation. Without fuel, tanks cannot move, jets cannot fly, and supply chains collapse. Beijing's alleged involvement, as the documents suggest, may not be merely about profit. It appears to be strategic positioning. By quietly financing and facilitating oil flows into Russia, China could ensure that Moscow could continue exporting discounted crude to Chinese refineries in return. This would strengthen Beijing's energy security and weaken the global oil price ceiling enforced by the West. Analysts suggest that China's ultimate goal may be to ensure that Russia remains a viable geopolitical counterweight to the West. A stable Moscow keeps the United States and NATO preoccupied in Europe, which aligns with Beijing's grand strategy of shaping a multipolar world order. This discovery also underscores the increasing sophistication of Ukraine's intelligence apparatus. This particular mission reportedly involved collaboration between Ukrainian cyber intelligence, military reconnaissance units, and Western partners specializing in sanctions enforcement. It's also worth noting that this is not the first time Ukraine has uncovered such covert operations. Earlier this year, Kyiv exposed a Belarusian intermediary that was rerouting European microchips to Russia through Turkish suppliers. Each new revelation fits into a larger pattern, one that reveals how Ukraine has become increasingly adept at tracing the financial arteries of Russia's war economy. The diplomatic fallout from Ukraine's revelation was swift. Beijing's initial reaction was one of cautious denial. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement insisting that China has not provided material support to any party involved in the conflict, and that all its trade activities comply with international law. Yet the statement notably did not include an outright dismissal of Ukraine's specific claims. Moscow's response, in contrast, was defiant. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov declined to comment directly on the Ukrainian report, calling it part of an information war designed to sow discord between Russia and China. However, sources in Russian media suggest that the revelation has caused alarm. Reports indicate that emergency meetings were held within the Ministry of Energy and the Federal Security Service, or FSB, to discuss contingency plans. There is growing concern that the exposure will disrupt critical fuel supplies just as winter approaches, a season when both military and civilian energy consumption peaks. In Kyiv, the mood was one of quiet triumph. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky praised his intelligence community, describing the exposure as another decisive step toward isolating Russia's war economy. In his nightly address, he emphasized that the truth is as powerful as any weapon. International reaction came swiftly. The European Union announced that it will be examining the evidence presented by Kyiv to determine whether the Chinese entities involved violated existing sanctions frameworks. The United States, meanwhile, has reportedly requested access to the intelligence dossier. The US Treasury Department is reviewing the intelligence, and officials have hinted that new measures may be introduced under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CAATSA. This is not just about punishing China, it is about closing the loopholes that allow Moscow to survive. Sanctions enforcement has been a challenging aspect of Western strategy, as Russia has repeatedly adapted by creating shadow fleets and shifting trade routes eastward. Ukrainian officials are already leveraging this intelligence success diplomatically. President Zelensky's administration has briefed both the European Commission and the G7 partners, urging them to tighten enforcement against Chinese logistics intermediaries. What makes this entire incident especially intriguing is the timing. Just days before Ukraine's revelation, Beijing had publicly reaffirmed its call for peace negotiations and criticized Western nations for prolonging the conflict. This apparent contradiction exposes the delicate balancing act that Beijing has been playing. This exposure may mark a turning point in the global perception of China's role. While Beijing has so far avoided direct sanctions by claiming neutrality, this makes it far more difficult to maintain that stance. Western officials are now likely to debate whether China's actions cross the line from economic cooperation into material support, a classification that carries serious diplomatic consequences. This balancing act is becoming increasingly perilous for Beijing. Continuing to assist Moscow could trigger economic retaliation from the West, risking trade disruptions at a time when China's domestic economy is already under strain. On the other hand, distancing itself from Russia would undermine one of Beijing's most critical strategic alliances. From a geopolitical standpoint, Ukraine's intelligence victory serves multiple purposes. Firstly, it undermines Russia's credibility. Secondly, it sends a clear message to Beijing. Covert support to Moscow will not go unnoticed. And finally, it demonstrates Ukraine's growing sophistication in hybrid warfare, where intelligence, cyber operations, and diplomacy converge. Military analysts in Kyiv argue that such exposures not only disrupt Russia's logistics, but also erode confidence among its allies. In that sense, Ukraine's exposure of the $2.4 billion oil route is more than a revelation. It is a calculated geopolitical strike, one aimed not just at Moscow's logistics, but at the very foundation of its alliances. As the war enters another grueling winter phase, energy scarcity within Russia would amplify logistical challenges. Each disrupted supply chain compounds the pressure on the Kremlin, and every revelation like this one shifts the balance of power, even if subtly in Kyiv's favor.